I'm Kathleen Trapphagen, and I'm facilitating the OST Impact Group of Grantmakers for Education. And this is our monthly Friday learning series. In case you don't know which meeting you're in, which Zoom you're in today, this is the one. It's an hour, and today we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan and the role of philanthropy, how we as philanthropic institutions can set ourselves up to build the capacity and maximize the chances that our sector can access the resources they need to really dramatically scale the work that they're doing. So that's what we're talking about today. I'm going to turn it over to Jody Grant of the Afterschool Alliance in just a second. But I've got an opening question. So please introduce yourself in the chat by saying who you are, what organization you're with, and what is one hope you have for spring, which starts tomorrow. I think I live in New England and we're in sort of like deception spring or something, because it does not feel that way out there, but it is coming. Spring is coming for my fellow New Englanders. So go ahead and tell us your hopes for spring in the chat, along with your name and organization. So we're going to hear from Jody Grant, Afterschool Alliance. We're going to hear from Gigi Anthony and Gwyn Hughes, Wallace and Mott, respectively. Have some respondents from Dale Anglin of Cleveland Foundation and Richard Tagley of Andy Roddick. We're going to have some small groups and discussion time. And then we're going to wrap today with a talk about a deadline that's coming up, which is next Friday, for GFE conference session breakout proposals. And we really want the OST sector to have a super strong showing. Richard's chairing the conference committee this year, so he's going to tell us about that at the end. So stay with us for the hour. And Jody, I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. Let me get my PowerPoint up. Share. Bear with me for a second. There we go. So first of all, I'm just going to say thank you. So for all of you that have been supporting the work of those of us in the after school, out of school time field, this plan truly is a rescue plan. It is probably the biggest thing to happen to the after school and out of school time world since the creation of the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And I'm really excited to walk you through it. There is enormous opportunity in this bill for every community, and there are also going to be enormous hurdles in accessing these funds. So I'm thrilled to really have the chance to kind of lay it out so that, you know, in the future we can figure out how we can leverage everybody's resources to get as many of these federal dollars as possible to the kids that are most in need. So one of the things, you know, in the bill is there's several sections that can be used in our field. One is the flat out funding for education. And within the education funding, there are set asides for learning loss, and then explicit, and I'll go into more detail, set asides for after school and summer. There's also childcare funding. Our field has been most successful in getting school-age childcare dollars in the past out of the first two COVID bills. This bill has $1 billion for AmeriCorps. So when we're talking about how do we gear up staffing in some of our sites, that could be a huge resource to tap into AmeriCorps. And then also states and locals have discretionary dollars. And while those don't need to be earmarked for education, that is also where in the past we've been most successful. So if we look at, you know, the 600 million plus COVID dollars programs have tapped into, so far the bulk has come from childcare funding and discretionary funding, but I think we're about to change that. So you know, in the bill, there is $30 billion that are set aside for learning loss. I hate the term learning loss. I like accelerated learning. I think when we're talking about learning, one of the things that I'm most excited about is the language explicitly talks about social emotional learning, non-academic support. Whenever I've talked to the White House, they feel very strongly that we want holistic learning. It doesn't mean that the states and the locals aren't going to give it to summer school. So, but I think there's some real opportunities, and in these set asides, at the state level, there's over $8 billion that can be used for learning loss. And of that, 1.2 billion is targeted just for summer enrichment, and 1.2 billion is targeted just for after school enrichment. All of it could be used for that, but that's a huge victory when you think about the fact that our funding each year is 1.2 billion. And then at the local level, so each local education agency is going to get $22 billion spread out amongst communities. As I mentioned, part of this is looking where the money goes. At the state level, there are these explicit set-asides for after-school enrichment and summer enrichment. At the local level, it isn't as explicit. But once again, we need to look to the decision makers because they can give this money directly to CBOs. It does not have to go to 21st century programs, although having that infrastructure is a great way to start. And just a little bit on the timing of all of this, it's going to be fast. So one of the things to be thinking about is where do we have infrastructure already on the ground? Where do we have relationships already on the ground that we can scale up? Because the money's going out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then the local education agencies are expected to have their share of the funds within the next 2 months. The good news for us is we should be, even though this money is going out immediately, there's 3 summers and 2 school years where it can be used. So part of the goal is to make sure that everything we're doing is quality so that ideally, particularly in our space, this money can be reappropriated as we go forward. So I know there's a lot of talk about it being a one-time Band-Aid, but I think that we have the opportunity, if you look at the demand, to really build something for our field. And it's also a chance to put our field on the map because so many people don't really know what summer school, what summer learning is. They think it's summer school. And when parents find out about much more comprehensive programs, they're much more supportive of that. This is really where the work is now. At the national level, many of us have obviously worked on the original legislation to get in the language, not with any foundation dollars, but to get that language in there for after school summer, and even to get in the language on the set-asides for learning loss for after school and summer. That was a little bit of a fight, but we won it. And now we're working with all the agencies, Department of Education, HHS, to try to make sure that we get whatever guidance is needed to make it as effective as possible at the state and local level. And we're going to want to hear from people at the state and local level as to what we need to be doing at the federal level. But then the real work is going to be going to the state education agencies and the local education agencies and convincing them that these funds should go to more than just school districts. And this has always been our biggest challenge. The easiest thing to do is to think about your own employees within your own walls, as opposed to thinking larger about all of the resources in a community. The other thing we're just to flag that we're really worried about is this is a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of actors coming in trying to go after these dollars. And as we all know, relationships are key. So we don't necessarily want a fly-by-night, organization that doesn't have a relationship in the community with fancy flyers coming in and taking all these dollars. Just flat out tutoring nowhere near as effective as having mentoring and, again, people from the community. So I think those are some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, because there will be enormous competition for these funds, and the state and local education agencies are overwhelmed. So they're going to want easy, spoon-fed answers for where they can put the funds. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail. I just want to make it clear that while we are really excited about the $30+ billion in education, I mean, these are huge, staggering numbers. That's not it. We are not going to, close our eyes to some of the other funding sources out there. So whether it's the childcare dollars, which I think we will absolutely be tapping into, or the AmeriCorps dollars, that's on our radar too. And then, I just wanted to end it with, everybody has an important role to play in this. So I wanted to urge all of you, and this doesn't just mean financial support, but in every way, how we can think about the infrastructure we already have. So intermediaries, local community-based organizations, how do we connect those resources to school districts if they don't already have a connection? How do we elevate their voices? Many of you might have connections both with the education and the out of school time partners, bringing them together. I think it's really important right now as we navigate this to elevate the voices of our parents and our students. They do not want just tutoring in summer school and remedial support. So I think the more we can elevate those voices, the more that we can come in and help fill that blank. Really highlight the need for social, emotional, mental health of our kids. So those emotional relationships, the need to reconnect, and the importance of using all of this to strengthen resources in a community so that they are sustainable. I did want to flag, because Kathleen asked me to, and this is really important. There is a provision in the law about maintenance of equity. So making sure that, our communities with the least resources aren't cut, and that this money is used to just supplement those cuts in any kind of way. So there's, more information on that, but I think that was also a concern too, as, states and locals have lost revenues, that this is just going to fill in empty gaps as opposed to building back. And then the last thing, and you're going to get all of this, so please feel free to share it, is resources that we are constantly putting together, both at the state and local level, to help stakeholders reach out to the decision makers to get resources on the ground to after school and to summer. And before I ended, I was just going to say some of this I know for, those of us at the After School Alliance and some of our allies, it's a little overwhelming, but it's if there's any place to start, it is this summer right now. There's going to be enormous attention focused on what's happening this summer. The policymakers that put the money out there are really looking to see some success stories this summer. And the great news is summer is our space. It's where, out of school time programs really can thrive in providing comprehensive programs. And as, Wallace Foundation has supported research with RAND, it shows that really make a difference in a way that is fun and really embraces all of the social needs of our kids too. So I think that is my quick and dirty summary of what's going on, and look for constant updates as this evolves.
Great, thank you, Jody. There was one question about supplanting, and so I'm not sure actually if that is answered by the maintenance of equity requirements, but can states and locals essentially spend less money to get this money? The answer is no, right?
The idea is they're not supposed to. I think we're still unclear about what are going to be all the different, enforcement mechanisms, but and particularly, if this is going through something like 21st century, it cannot supplant, it has to supplement. So I think there will be a lot of effort to try and make sure that happens. I think the devil's in the details.
Right. Okay. And when I'm going to turn it over to Gwen in a minute, but there are a couple of more questions in the chat, Jody, that I'm going to ask you to answer in the chat.
Yes, so and some of those, and I should say that right now the federal legislation says it's very broad and we don't have a lot of details. So it says you can use this for summer learning, you can use this for after school. It doesn't make it clear, but we would interpret it as saying you can absolutely use it for professional development, you can use it for training. Could you use it for work study? It depends on the implementation again. So we will keep sharing that, and a lot of it is going to be state by state.
Yeah, great. So Jody, keep an eye on the chat as Gwen does her thing, and you can answer people's questions. And also, I know since you shared your slides and they have some links in them, if you want to throw links in the chat if you have a minute, because people didn't get to access that since it was a shared screen. And we will give you all the deck too. So I'm going to turn it over to Gwen, because that was, and thank you, Jody, that was a great introduction to what it is that we have in front of us and the sort of once in a very long time opportunity that we have. So as people that work for philanthropic organizations, what is your role and responsibility to really, as much as we possibly can, help the sector access these resources and scale their programming. And that's what Gwen's going to speak to. And then we're going to discuss this together. So Gwen, turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Kathleen, and thank you, Jody. Just to kind of reiterate, and I want to start by thanking everyone on this call. I've been scrolling through as I was listening to Jody, and it's great to see all of you. We are obviously all looking forward to when we can see everybody in person. And I want to thank you for your leadership, my partners and colleagues at other foundations and also in the field. I'm convinced, I think we are here at the foundation, we would not be seeing this kind of opportunity in the rescue plan, but for the work of many of you, all of you on the phone. And it truly is a moment that I don't think we're likely to see again. So we appreciate you. We appreciate what you have done locally and nationally. And it's going to take all of us to really fully leverage this opportunity. And that's kind of what we wanted to spend a few moments talking about today, and how at the Mott Foundation, we're looking at envisioning this and supporting the field so that we don't just see this infusion of programming now that doesn't really sustain beyond the 3 years. And that's a big lift. But as for those of us in philanthropy, this is truly a moment, I believe, for us to make a huge difference and impact on our investments. So we start out here with seizing our moment. We could go to the next slide. Part of what we've been thinking about, and I wanted to share this slide, it really dovetails with a lot of our conversations as part of the OST impact group and different sort of variations over the past year. We've been talking with our grantees and the field of really pushing this idea of thinking and acting big. These are huge dollars, the likes of which we have not seen before, and we have not been called upon to implement and help inform. That requires some big thinking and really leveraging this opportunity. We want to encourage our grantees and really, our influence to lead with equity. This funding is allocated through Title I formulas. There is a huge emphasis on helping the highest need kids and the most distressed communities. Having said that, we all know there is a lot of work to do to create more equitable opportunities, especially for our BIPOC youth and families, and that is a real opportunity here. One particular niche at the Mott Foundation that we've been really focused on for many years is emphasizing community partnerships. There simply is more money here than can be spent through the system, through existing channels. And when Jody talks about using our existing infrastructure, I couldn't agree with her more, because if we don't do that and we don't expand from there, we really won't be able to emphasize this notion of community partnerships. And then there's, as we all know, a huge lift to really help schools form those partnerships. So when you look at the lion's share of this funding, it's going directly to districts and schools, and they're going to need help to think outside their school and their immediate community. But we know that based on research, if we don't have these partnership programs at the core, kids are not going to get the kind of enrichment and learning opportunities that they're going to need to re-engage in learning after the pandemic, particularly if, as one of my colleagues funder colleagues in Michigan has referred to before, many of our families were already experiencing a pandemic. So that's a challenge, I think, and a real opportunity. We really do want to focus on this notion of what do we need to do now? I think as funders, we have this opportunity to plan for sustainability. What can we be doing now on the front end? What additional resources and investments could we as funders make to our partner organizations and groups on the ground that will help us at the end of 3 years be able to say, these programs are essential. These programs are vital. Here's what has happened. So that schools, parents, communities truly see the value and determine that they're going to support them moving forward. And so the focus on quality, something that I've worked with many of you and learned from many of you over the years, planning for sustainability, those pieces here are really important. And also we know from our experience with the field, this is where so much of the innovative learning experiences are happening that kids desperately need right now. If we don't do that here, we're just, I think, missing an opportunity. We do want to focus on common messaging. I think this is another key piece of not only hitting the ground running in terms of the right kinds of implementations and designs that can happen locally and from the statewide perspective, but really continuing on from there. The more we can speak around the same kinds of models, promote the same kinds of partnership plans for after school, expanded learning, summer, all of these pieces, the more, I think the more likely we are to see these programs be sustained over the long term. And that's, again, I think another real component of funding that we can provide. The government is not going to fund strategic communications, but we can. In talking with many of my colleagues who work in departments of ed and other places in the government, many of these districts and schools and states are going to respond to examples. This is another area where I think we can be very helpful. The field is going to need to run so fast to be able to help inform this funding that it's going to be a bigger lift to share those examples across the country, across states, across localities. This, again, is another area that we can help with. We've been talking with our grantees, really honing in on a couple areas here. So when you think about when we work with our statewide after school networks, which many of you are familiar with, these coalitions and nonprofit organizations at each state, we're really encouraging them to think big and to put together what we refer to as a big ask, if you will. And I think that this strategy could translate to different, whether it's state level, local level, and that big ask for this funding is meant to help organize the actual implementation and to encourage local and state policymakers to get on board with a way to get this money out the door quickly using quality approaches. So we talk about big plays and ideas to expand and scale existing programs, again, using the existing infrastructure and not just thinking of it as funneling it through what's already there, but actually using this opportunity to leverage the infrastructure and improve programming, right? That's what we want to see to really achieve equity. We've also talked about the importance of summer. So model designs that add summer to existing programs, and this could be vice versa, right? Adding after school to summer, but knowing that this sort of continuity of programming over the year is key to helping many of our kids. And then finally, the third bucket and opportunity here is to coordinate and create new programs. And again, we emphasize here focusing on community partnerships, because again, we think that part of the potential downside here, or maybe our competition, if you will, is for private organizations and companies and well-financed groups to offer sort of niche programming in, say, tutoring or college prep, and all of that is important, but is not comprehensive enough, as we know, to provide the kind of supports and opportunities that many of our kids are going to need during the after school hours and over the summer. We have we've talked about, I think, Jody is not really going to talk about this, but I can without, I think, some of the language that she and other groups were successful in. This is a very helpful language that's in the law. It talks about comprehensive after-school services. And that is fantastic, because in order to achieve that comprehensive after-school program, we kind of know what needs to go into that. And so we really want to be pushing for what does that include and how do we get that on the ground. So, I think obviously the focus is on getting definite program model designs and big asks at the state and local and intermediary levels that will help drive how this funding is implemented. There's also many of our intermediaries that we support, like the networks, like my colleagues at Wallace, who have supported many of the city intermediaries and systems, and many of you at the local level. There are roles that intermediaries can play that we can help support. Outreach to and coordination of program. Some of our state networks and others are already being asked whether they'd be interested in actually administering the grant funding. Those opportunities will happen as well. There is this really key piece of looking at data collection and analysis. And perhaps one of the most key areas right on the front end here is the PD that it's going to take to get programs back and up and running and with qualified staff, because we know from the surveys that the Alliance did and others, how many programs did actually have to close and how much staff we lost. So it's a big lift for the field to get these programs up and running with quality staff, and that's going to be a huge need. All of these things are pieces that intermediaries and intermediary organizations or networks can help with, but they do need additional resources right now in order to do it. I think that, we've started to think about this as it's one of these there is a sprint and there's also a marathon approach. And as funders, we have the opportunity to, I think, play important roles in both. We are looking at and would love to talk with others of you who are interested in how do we support additional capacity at the local and state intermediary level. These are things that I think will, if we could increase capacity in the short term, are going to pay a huge dividend on the other side. As Jody said, part of the reality of this is, while the money doesn't have to be spent for 3 years, so it can roll out over 3 years, the design of how it's going to be spent is happening right now. And that's where our timeline is really critical in terms of supporting the field. I think I'll show just one more slide and then kind of want to move on and hear from many of you. And also we have a framework to share in sort of diving into some ways we can support some of our investments in the field. So this chart is a little, it's got a lot of numbers on it, but it's helpful, I think, to look at what does this actually mean in terms of scale in a particular state. And then if you are working at a local level, you can sort of do that local analysis from here. But if you just take one state, for instance, this is sort of the breakdown of the ESSER's funding for SEAs. If you look at the California line here, so their total estimated, now these figures are in thousands. So the total estimated state grant is 15 billion. 15 billion. Now, California, of course, is large, but when you look over to the 5% column for learning loss, that's 753 million. The summer enrichment 1% is 150 million. The 1% for after school programs is 150 million. And then the last column here on the right, 2.7 billion for the 20% for learning loss going to local districts. So this is more money. If you just look at the 2% set aside that Jody highlighted for after school and summer enrichment, that is more funding than we've seen in this particular area ever. So when you start to look at the scale, I think it starts to give you this picture of what is the opportunity here and how many programs could actually be created. And at the end of the day, I really believe, and I think that if you sort of do more of the analysis of these numbers, this could be approximating what many of us have been working for many years, which is after school for all, particularly after school in many or most of the low income schools and neighborhoods in the country. That is a huge, that's a stretch goal here, but there is enough money to make that happen if we can work together to achieve it. And so those are just some of the thoughts that we have. This is very much, kind of we learn more every day, every week, because this is the guidance, is developing. And so the Department of Ed will send out guidance. They sent out some already. There will be more and more nuances that we learn, but fundamentally, the more we can help our grantees and intermediaries and programs get to these tables well prepared and with big asks, the more of it we're going to see actually get to kids in quality after school programs. So with that, I think Kathleen's idea was to look at sort of a chart or kind of way that we're thinking about how could we start to prioritize together if you are interested in additional funding or funding strategies to support grantees. Kathleen, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm going to drop a link into the chat, but as I do that, I also want to call on Gigi Anthony from Wallace Foundation to talk a bit about
Gigi,
their
hi.
approach. Yes, and actually, as a always continuously learning facilitator, I am feeling that we might stay as a full group because I know I want to hear from a couple of other folks that are on. So just to let you know, we're sort of changing the agenda a bit in real time. But I will keep you updated. So Gigi, if you can just talk a bit about how the Wallace Foundation is approaching this moment. And I'm also going to drop in the chat a link to a framework that we're developing that's based, really directed to philanthropy, local, regional, state, national, different geographic footprints, different opportunities for you to think about how to use all the tools in your toolbox, not just grants, and help respond in this way. So Gigi, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I had trouble getting on the call. So Gwen thought I had abandoned her, but I didn't.
No, I knew you were with us in spirit, or
Yeah,
you would be.
spirit. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulty. I'm not going to take a lot of time because we're already eating quite a bit into our time, and I know we want to hear from everyone else. But I will just say that at Wallace, we are thinking very similar to what Gwen was laying out, but particularly at the state intermediary and local intermediary levels as a place where we hope to be able to give information, particularly about evidence and practice. So helping folks think about the messaging. We feel like the best thing that we can do at this time is make sure that our efforts are about helping people spend this money well. And I've been watching the chat and couldn't agree more with Jennifer. This summer is fast approaching and folks are doing the best they can in the field with what they have to work with. I think it's really important what Gwen was talking about, thinking about the marathon. So we have what's happening right now and this summer, but this is going to spend out, we think, over at least 3 summers. And so that means that we have an opportunity to think really strategically about sustainability and where to put that effort over time. This is a moment for those of us who've worked in this field for decades, a moment that many, many thousands of people have worked to make happen over, decades. And now the moment is here. And so the question is, how do we, when all of this is over at the end of the next 4 years, what are we trying to build in terms of infrastructure and partnerships and understanding about what's good for kids that can, endure beyond the stimulus money, beyond the infusion of money. And so the way that we've been thinking about that is really trying to help people understand that comprehensive approaches to summer and after school are very important. And that to do that, there has to be coordination and connections between LEAs and community resources and programs. And so we do have a lot of evidence about sort of how that can be done and a lot of models around the country of where that has happened in a way that's scalable and sustainable. So we've been really trying to focus on comprehensiveness of program design and then investments in coordination and the infrastructure locally that it takes to coordinate across many different programs to think about access and equity, how resources are distributed as an important element of thinking about this over the next 2 or 3 years. And then the third is really thinking about the content of what kids are getting and issues of belonging and cultural responsiveness and supporting kids' socio-emotional development as another important link, because that's also in the legislation. And it's a link between sort of out of school time practice and this idea that it links to kids' development, youth development sort of focuses. So those are kind of the 3 areas. It's also the 3 areas that Wallace focuses on anyway. But we have published some guidance for school districts. It's really focused at districts, but we're going to share it more broadly with some annotated bibliographies of research, and it lifts up case studies, models, practices that maybe folks could use to talk in their, to their folks at that level. So we'll share that today or tomorrow. You guys will get something from us that hopefully will be helpful in helping you think about how to make the case in your community. One last thing before I leave is the other thing is that's the power to convene. So now there's plenty of money, but technical assistance and convening leadership in the community, either at the program level or at this level of coordination, is something that foundations and philanthropy can do in a way that it's hard for governments, I think, to do as well. So this is another thing that we're thinking about. How could we convene conversations that can be catalytic for sustainability?
Thanks, Gigi. When you say you're going to share that, are you maybe probably a lot of people are already on your list?
Yeah, we're going to send it to you, Kathleen. We're going to send it to those people who we've got individual contacts for. But we will also send you a copy, and you are free. I mean,
And
we'd
we'll
love for
send
you
it
to
out
distribute it to whoever
Yeah,
you think it would be useful for.
good.
And,
So
and
then
it's not, I mean, it's not completely it's not like a lit review that's comprehensive and has everything in the world in it, but it does have what we have to that we want to share. And so, hopefully it'll be helpful.
Okay, that's awesome. And we will send that out to all of you who are registered for this series, along with the deck and all the resources that have been mentioned. Just want to shout out to Jody for keeping up with all the questions in the chat. Thank you, Jody, and Gwen and everyone doing that. I wanted to call on Richard just to give us a perspective of a local/regional perspective in this whole thing. Richard, how are you approaching how you're going to support your constituencies in Austin and beyond?
Kathleen. I think this framework that Gigi and Gwen has presented really resonates with how we are looking at this from the Central Texas perspective. And my colleague Mary Riggs, I think, is also on this call. So if she can also provide some insight to this. But we are given the chance now to look at this with large financial support. As funders, we can look at this as a jigsaw puzzle piece, right? That we are now able to put things together that we have not been able to do because of lack of resources. You know, the common communications infrastructure, for example, we are both supporting the Texas Partnership for Out of School Time, which is our statewide agency, as well as the Learn All the Time Network, which is the intermediary in Central Texas that we have acquired about a year ago. And creating this kind of common communications and advocacy tool so that people are really speaking the same language. We're also looking at continuing with the professional development supports. As Gigi mentioned, the convening, the role of us as conveners to put families, students, program providers, and school district personnel in one room to really talk about what are the priority activities and programs and supports that we need to put in place. But one of the more important things that I think as a funder here in the local community that we are positioned to do, we're not only recovering learning loss, we are recovering relationships that were lost, primarily because a lot of places closed, a lot of classrooms closed. And here in Central Texas, because of the winter storm that you've all heard about, you know, there was a lot of confusion about now news information. Can we really rely on certain institutions? Can we really rely on our school personnel? Is the school district really telling us the truth? And so this notion of, as we prepare for this influx of funding to come in, there's a lot of trust building that we can start supporting now in the local community. That is going to be I think, as Gwen talks about the sustainability of this and scalability of this, I think the common ground that we as funders can really start investing in is this trust building to recover and rebuild relationships that have been lost or paused.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Richard. And if folks have comments, questions on Richard's perspective, throw those in the chat right now. And I'm gonna call next on Dale Anglin from the Cleveland Foundation. Dale, what's happening?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I had to move my location. So first of all, this is fantastic news. I kind of heard it was coming down the pike, but it's nice to see a lot of the details. I do think it positions organizations like the Cleveland Foundation in Northeast Ohio, where we already have, I will just say, a group of intermediaries, leaders, stakeholders. We have a Say Yes program where we have been working for the last couple of years to bridge the gap between the OST world and our educational systems. But we've lacked money to make that happen. And so this actually literally is like, in your dream world, if you had the money you wanted, how would you design it? So I will just say, I feel a little lucky here. I don't know how everybody else is in their own situations, in that in COVID, frankly, because we've got academic learning pods here that we're all managing together with our districts, it has built a level of trust amongst our OST, multiple intermediaries, direct service providers, and multiple districts, frankly, in ways that nothing else would have done, because they all needed each other. So to me, this feels like, okay, now we've built some trust, but if you were going to design a system that really frankly served all kids in the ways we want all kids served, what would that look like? And so I'm already thinking, I was writing down tons of notes. I just went straight to sustainability, right? It's almost like summer 2021 is a pilot, and you just kind of see what works, and then you're building toward the next few years. And the other thing I'll just say is, what we've learned here in Ohio is, I love our governor in COVID. We're a poor state in one way. They always supplant dollars, always. And so any guidance from the feds that don't allow that to happen would be really helpful. We already have $1 billion that our governor gave all of us in the last 2 years in wellness dollars. Our district, because they also cut the district's budget, just use it to supplant the dollars. So you can't have that happen. This has to be additive. And any way that we're going to work, frankly, really hard to advocate to our state SEA to please do it that way. And I think that's where some of our dollars can go as foundations, is policy and advocacy to make sure the state uses the dollars in the way that they were intended to be used.
Thanks, Dale. I'm going to throw something in the chat that's a little bit more explanation of those maintenance provisions, the maintenance provision and the maintenance of equity provision that Ed Trust wrote. And so people can read that and get on their site. And we're also happy to, make connections to the Ed Trust people if people really want to dig into it and fully understand those rules. So thanks for that. Keep the conversation going in the chat. I wanted to call on Jen Peck of Partnership for Children and Youth in California. You are doing a lot, and I know you probably have some reactions to the folks, what has been said so far, and also reactions to the framework that we put out. So Jen, give us your view of how things are in California.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about this without trying to express the enormous sense of overwhelm that everybody in the system is feeling right now. And it's, on the one hand, incredibly exciting for so many of us to see all of this investment, particularly in places like summer. And it's incredibly daunting all at the same time. And one thing I want to say is I think all the ideas that have been put forward around things that need to happen around convening and development of tools and technical assistance and, working on the right now while thinking about the longer term and being strategic about that are all right on. They're all incredibly important. And I want to emphasize for those of us who are at the intermediary level, whether we're at the state level or at the local level or at the regional level, it's an enormous lift. And even each one of these tasks with the level of resource we're talking about, supporting the immediate implementation of dollars in just a couple months from now, plus this task of thinking about the long term and how we're going to sustain investment in strategic ways, is a very, very big lift and a complex task. And so in addition to some of the specific things that I think folks in the field need, particularly at the intermediary level around resources to convene, to develop tools, to provide technical assistance, et cetera, we also just need basic capacity to keep up with the unprecedented level of requests that we are getting to show up in places that we aren't always asked to show up, and I'll give you an example. All eyes are on expanded learning right now in our state, and I think this is true in a lot of places. And so we've had to clear the decks to create presentations for different district professional learning communities that have all of a sudden shifted their focus to planning for summer, and write blogs for this outlet and that outlet. And we're trying to respond to all of these requests so we can continue to get information out in the places that they're needed. But it's very, very challenging. And I want to connect that to another piece I want to emphasize that came up before, which is around the absolutely critical nature of strategic communications and our ability to be really good at communicating to a wide range of audiences through all of this. And I think a really important point connected to this is that while there's a lot that we can do in the expanded learning sector to develop tools and guidance and TA around how to run quality summer and expanded learning programs, you know, the pace at which this is happening and the scale at which this is happening, we're not going to be effective in communicating our messages around how these programs should be done based on all we know if we are communicating in a vacuum. And I think it's incredibly important that we are right out the bat collaborating and aligning our messages and our technical assistance with other entities that are trusted messengers with the groups, and, you know, in particular, the school districts that we're trying to impact. So, you know, and this is true for the near term and the long term. For the near term, we would be silly to be just distributing through our networks this great summer planning guide for LEAs that we just developed with NSLA. We are really leaning on groups like our State School Administrators Association and the County Superintendents Association and the State Department of Ed and others who have much bigger lists, but are also seen as more traditional K-12 partners. And when these tools are coming from them, they're going to get a whole lot more play. And it's not always a simple task to get that to happen, but it's so, so important. You know, the same with our equity groups, our education equity groups in our state. And I think this is true everywhere. They're another really important messenger to be talking about expanded learning. And there's education and advocacy to be happening with those groups as well to make sure they are saying the same things that we are saying about what works for kids in the expanded learning space and how urgent this is. For the longer term, you know, as we think about, you know, what we want to sustain and how we want to sustain it, and this is true at the local, state, and federal level, I really think those strategic alliances with some, you know, less traditional partners who are going to resonate with both policymakers and school districts really is one of the most important things. And that is going to take resources around convening and a certain kind of technical assistance that's not necessarily directed at programs, but directed at influencers, so that they're, like I said, saying the same things and communicating the same things that we're saying, and then ultimately advocating for the same things because they're better understanding why it matters. And then on top of that, I think for the longer term agenda, I think, you know, where, depending on where you sit at the local level, the state level, I think we're going to have to do some strategic sort of picking and choosing around which are the things that are going to be most important for us to sustain and how. And that's very contextual. You know, here in California, we have a unique challenge with, you know, a large after-school investment, although it doesn't come close to meeting all the need. But there's certain ways we're going to want to supplement and increase that investment. But also summer continues to be an enormous gap here. And so the way we design our longer term strategy around investment may look different from some other states. So I do think the ability to be supported to create those nuanced, more longer term plans is going to be very, very important as well. And I know I'm probably out of time. I could talk all day about this, about the things that we're seeing around our state and the opportunities that we have, but so much of it just boils down to, you know, the need for increased capacity, strategic communications, you know, and resources to do this really tough work of immediate response simultaneously with long-term planning.
Thanks, Jen. So I know we have about 5 minutes left, and we certainly threw a lot out there in this last 55 minutes. I want to say that we will follow up with our list. So if you're on this call, you're on the list, and we will share all of the resources that have been shared in the chat and on the screen. So if you do, thanks Brenda for throwing in some resources around SEL and professional development. And if others have resources to put in the chat, please do so, because we'll catch those and we'll amplify them. So I want to switch gears for a second. And I'm going to ask Richard. Richard is chairing the GFE conference committee this year. Yay, one of our own chairing the conference committee people. This is really awesome. So Richard, could you talk about that? I am going to also at the same time put in the chat a link to a document, which we'll leave you with. It's editable and it is for you to talk about your ideas for GFE conference proposals because the deadline is next Friday, people. So Richard, what would you like people to do?
Yes. So thank you, Kathleen. So yes, this year, the GFE annual conference is celebrating its 25th anniversary. So the theme really is looking forward to the next 25 years and really summing up what we have learned as a sector. In the past, especially in this past year, a lot of innovations, a lot of new partnerships, solid partnerships, best practices that have been established to link students and families to resources. So there's really a lot of opportunity for the out of school time sector and this impact group to focus on sessions that talk about that and how this same conversation around how can we take advantage of these new opportunities and scale them and sustain them over the long term. The conference is October 12 to 14. And I will let Celine at some point talk about this new approach because we are having some people who are able to come and travel and join now that we're being vaccinated and things might open up. But at the same time, there are also some travel restrictions that some of our colleagues have within their foundations and institutions. So we're looking at a hybrid kind of a regional approach to some regions may have in-person gatherings that are looking at clear safety precautions and guidelines, and some are going to be held virtually. So if you've seen the Golden Globes, the Golden Globe Awards, it's some mix to that. But again, the RFP, the call for sessions is on due by March 26th. So really urging our out of school time funders to really think about what are the creative, innovative, forward-thinking, collaborative, equity-centered approaches that you have seen in your communities, either that you've funded, co-funded, or somebody else has funded. So you may also urge some funders in your communities to join with you if you're the member, or for them to join as a member to be part of this very important conversation. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Richard. So yes, you have to be a GFE member to propose a session, right? So if you're not a GFE member and you're eligible to be a GFE member, then we really, really encourage you to join GFE. And that is the best way to really be part of this community. If that's not possible for whatever reason, then definitely, find a GFE member and partner with them. So I'm going to, in the chat, I put in the link to the file, and I'd love for you all to just use that for your own talk. And I am happy to keep an eye on this next week and make connections for folks that are looking for partners for their ideas. But, or if you have an idea and you want to talk it through with somebody, then just give me a call. So we really, really want you guys to write as many awesome OST focused proposals as possible. So thanks so much for spending an hour with us today. The last thing I'm going to put in the chat is the next two programs. So these have moved to monthly. If you haven't noticed, we're the third Friday of every month from 12 to 1. And the next two are April, we're going to do a deep dive with the researchers that brought us America After 3. So please join us for that. And then in May, we're going to do folks that brought us the OST book series. Shout out to Brenda and others. We're going to do a theme on using data and building systems for using data to improve quality. So if you've got ideas, then also let me know those too, and we will figure out a way to get those on one of these calls. But in the meantime, happy spring, happy weekend, and happy American Rescue Plan. Thank you so much, everybody who joined us and who was speaking today. Take care.